TYT Sports, everybody. Ben Mankewicz, Michael Schur. So Michael Sam signed this week by the Dallas Cowboys to the practice squad. Good for Dallas. And good for St. Louis. I'm going to indemnify them in this conversation because they did draft him, and theoretically they've gone through all the nonsense distraction talk, which is I don't buy at all.
Yeah.
And they would have had to deal with it a little more in week one, but they've dealt with it. They have a terrific defensive line, and he appeared to be the 9th of 8 or the 8th of 7.
Yeah. And Westbrook was good. And I mean, he was drafted by the wrong team, but we were all.
And if the Rams had an injury on the defensive line, he would have made the team. So
if he was a quarterback, he would have made the team.
If he was a quarterback, he would have made the team. They should have tried him out there.
Yeah.
So the Cowboys have signed into the practice squad, but and Jeff Schultz of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution wrote a piece before he'd been signed, and he makes some overwhelmingly compelling points for those who think that Michael Sam's sexuality is still not an issue to a number of NFL teams. We don't know which ones because obviously he's not a fit at some teams. Mm-hmm. But overall, in general, a 22-year-old pass rusher. In our previous segment, we talked about the development of offense in this league, and the best way to stop that offense is not with really talented cornerbacks. You need those, but the way to stop it is by pressuring the passer. That's what every coach in the league thinks. They are desperate for guys who get after the passer. And here is a 22-year-old with obvious upside, right? Maybe he's 23, but with obvious upside, a rookie who recorded 3 sacks in the preseason.
Yeah.
The notion that the Dallas Cowboys, the Chicago Bears, that Washington, that all these teams that have obvious defensive inefficiencies could not use this guy is nuts. And the Cowboys recognize it and they signed him to the practice squad. So here's what Jeff Schultz had to say. Remember, practice squads, 10 players, adds 320 jobs.
And it used to be 8 players until this season. This season's 10 players. And just a thing about the practice squad is any team can pick you off of another team's practice squad, but if they do, they have to add you to their 53-man roster. So
they can't go practice squad to practice squad.
You can't move practice squad to practice squad. And most practice squads, as Mike Smith said with Atlanta, most are made up of people that they cut, at the end of cuts, waived, cleared waivers, and then they reclaim them so that they know the system already for that team.
Here's what Jeff Schultz writes. Statistics in the NFL's preseason can be misleading, but Sam had 3 sacks for the Rams, as we mentioned. According to NFL.com, only 12 players had at least 2.5 sacks in preseason. 10 of those 12s are on active rosters, and 1, San Diego's Cordaro Law, was signed to the practice squad. So that's 11 of 12. The other, Schultz writes, is Sam. He continues, there were 49 players in the preseason who recorded at least 2 sacks. Again, Sam had 3. 38 of the 49 are on active rosters. 5 have been signed to practice squads. That leaves 6 without jobs today. 1 is Sam. Then he breaks down the other 5, which I also found interesting too. Kalen Burnett, undrafted in 2012, signed and spent 2 years with the Raiders. He suffered a knee injury in training camp. That's why he didn't make it. Marcus Dixon spent time with 4 teams since 2008, including 2 years with Dallas, an indication that he's a journeyman and hasn't quite made it, and there isn't potential. This guy's 6 years he came into the league. They know what he can do. Larry English, former first-round pick, played for San Diego for 5 years, failed to win a job in camp in Tampa Bay. Again, proven track record of what a guy can do. Israel Adonijah, been in the NFL since 2003, failed to make the Giants roster. Same thing. He's over 30 years old. He's been in the league 11 years. And Martez Wilson played 3 years in the league with New Orleans, Oakland, and Dallas. All 5 have spent time in the league, some for a significant number of seasons, Schultz writes. Sam is the only young player just out of college coming off a great collegiate career, SEC Defensive Player of the Year, who logically has a potential upside. That's what the league is about, and certainly what the practice squad is about. It is hard to read those stats and think that it's nuts, not only that Sam not get signed, that he wasn't signed to somebody's active roster, one of those teams that can't. Now, we may learn, in 4 days, he may get plucked off the Cowboys practice squad right after Sunday for some team that fails to rush the passer or gets somebody hurt on Sunday. But
I don't see a great likelihood of that happening just because there was such a reluctance by so many of these teams to sign him to their practice squad in the first place.
Yeah, no, I'm just being generous, but I think you're probably right. I think what's most likely to happen is that the Cowboys, as the Cowboys are likely to do, playing the Niners, and maybe that the Niners have a terrific defense and like to control the ball, maybe that game ends 20-13. But if that game ends 37-20 Niners, and they run up and down the field on the Cowboys in Dallas, then it looks like at least Dallas would recognize, okay, you know what, let's put some pressure on the passer. Let's bring in this 22-year-old who might have 12 sacks at the end of the year. And the Cowboys have significant injuries on the defensive line as well.
Yeah, I can't do this. Is a really fascinating article by Jeff Schultz. I think what exposing, because we don't forget Michael Sam. I mean, the minutia of these stats that you look at coming out of training camp and before the season, it's amazing to know the success rate and sort of these benchmarks that you have to have, the number of sacks and how many people who get this many sacks are actually signed to active rosters and cut and on practice squads. And then you look at Michael Sam, and the obvious conversation that comes up is about the distraction to the team, which, listen, it is a distraction. It's a momentary distraction. But historically, I mean, look at the Dodgers, clubhouse when they signed Jackie Robinson. It had to have been totally distracting then, right?
Yeah.
To the Dodgers, the players, the press that was coming in, the fans that would be catcalling Jackie Robinson.
So much so that they only won the pennant almost every year.
I was going to say, and then look at the success that they had,
distracting.
and now look how we look back at them. We look back at them with reverence for having done that. And Branch Rickey, whatever his motivations may have been, you look back at reverence. So with reverence at that, so there's a chance to be historic here, and I think that you put up with a little bit of distraction
also,
for that.
The distraction is that the press asks you about it.
Right.
These guys hate the press asking them anything.
Right.
Guess what? If they're asking you about Michael Sam, they're not asking you about why you only have one defensive back who can play.
Right. Or why your defensive lineman beat up his girlfriend the other day.
That's right. Or anything like that. So I mean, you don't like to answer questions from the press ever.
Yeah.
You're not really going to have to answer more. You have your time that the press is allowed in. It's going to be a lot about Michael Sam in the beginning, and not something else. It might be a little different. I don't really think it's potentially any more distracting. Some players, probably on every team, will cause a problem. Probably fewer players than we think or we thought before, given what apparently happened with St. Louis, which was that they were like, yeah, whatever, we're not talking about this anymore.
Right.
The above, the stuff I read you before, suggests to this point, NFL teams are letting their decision-making be affected by something other than Sam's playing abilities. The obvious conclusion, says Schultz, there's concern signing Sam to the practice squad could be that concern signing Sam to the practice squad could be too great of a distraction to their team, as we talked about. His final paragraph, his final sentence. It would be nice if this was just about football, like the NFL wants you to believe, but it's clearly not.
Yeah, well, it never was going to be. That's okay. But still, the Cowboys saw that the guy could play football, and they signed him. There's no way to have made this. I mean, Michael Sam, talked about his sexuality. He came out knowing what was going to happen. It always takes somebody who's brave enough to do that in these situations. So, of course, the media is going to talk about it. Players who are unaccustomed to it for whatever reason are going to talk about it. They're going to be asked about it. It's going to be a distraction. That's fine. But to ignore his prowess on the football field is an entirely different story, which is what I think Schultz got totally in this article.